Sorry, before I realized I had not sent this as a blank email. Please recognize and be sensitive to my story below. It took much courage to write as I am still being stalked by these individuals to this day. Hello, my name is just call me Afe. First of all, I love your channel, and it's made me feel less lonely in my own experience as I've had that have made my life change in the worst of ways. I shall begin by discussing what has led up to the event in that of January 2012 by describing how the offender and attacker had began to target my home and gone to learn of my address, license plate number, and car that year when I just turned 17 years old. Being a senior in high school and having come out of a rehab, I had been signing myself out, and as I signed the information to leave, I noticed a man within the inpatient facility, uncomfortably close to my person, trying to lean in on my conversation with my family and the nurse of the ward. To receive phone calls from the outside, we had to verify that the caller was indeed our relative and relay the name verbally to the nurse, so the strange man was able to hear my mother's first and last name and my home phone number at that time. I just felt it was uncomfortable and possibly he was waiting to use the phone lines after me, but this was not the case. As I spoke on the phone and told my mother when and where to expect to get me within the following days, the strange man disappeared from my view and then returned to a further area down in the nursing station table exterior while writing something on paper. After speaking for the allowed time, I then hung up the phone and motioned for him to have his phone now and apologized for taking long if he was waiting. He smiled and shook his head, saying he was not waiting for the phone. The nurse then called my name a few days later to leave and stated my full name as to not confuse any other patients, even though there were none with a similar name since my name is unique. Feeling uncomfortable with any personal information spoken aloud about myself, I waited and moved cautiously, making sure no one was watching me move to the nurse with my belongings that had already been set at the door ahead of time. The strange man, having heard my name, then ran towards the door and handed me a note that read a phone number and his name with a heart. I should be specific. The stranger was around my age and was there for aggravated assault, attempted murder, possession of firearms, and aggravated assault on a police officer, as well as having restraining orders against him held by multiple people. Yet, I was not privy to this knowledge at the time. Many of the individuals within my ward had severe criminal charges, whereas I did not have any, and this was the only area I could receive treatment to detox and get clean from a severe and long-lasting addiction that had robbed years of my life. Upon leaving, I maintained being sober and kept myself together for over 7 months. There was a call to my house phone. My mother had answered and stated that the caller said they were calling for me. Since I changed my phone number at this time and had friends from Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, my mother and I assumed it may be a person from a meeting or something. She handed me the phone, and I looked at the caller ID. It read a town or city I cannot name due to fear of being recognized, and I spoke. The caller referred to himself as, for the story's sake, Dale James, to prevent the real identity being revealed for my own safety after the many reports filed against him and arrests. I stated that I did not remember anyone of that name and was not allowed to give my number out or contact males from the meeting until I had over 9 to 12 months of being sober, and was about to end the conversation when he said he was from the detox and rehab center I had attended 6 months and 1 week ago. My blood ran cold, and chills ran up to my back and arms. I was shaking. "How did you get my number?" I asked him, to which he replied that he had written it down before my leaving, when he overheard it being repeated by me and the nurses talking. I then asked what he wanted. He said he just wanted to take me on a date or spend some time with me. Even though this scenario was extremely creepy, the man was only 4 years older than me and was decent looking and was kind on the phone, and simply stated he was just hoping that he would have a chance to go on one date. Going against my better judgment, I stated I would accept one date, but that was it. He said, "Okay, great, then come outside." I then dropped the phone and ran to the window. He was waiting outside in a blue sports car that was brand new. I was scared of what I got myself into. I didn't understand how he could have known where I lived. He beeped the horn a few times and called many times while I mentally prepared myself and armed myself with a long switchblade and got downstairs into the car. I made sure to take a photo of the license plate and text it to my mom as well as the phone number, which she always had me to do anyways. He only had driven down the street when he began to say creepy things, like he wanted to make me live in his home and keep me, stating that he loved me, and bizarre things of that sort. I then opened the door and jumped out of the car while we were still a few blocks away from my house, ran through the yards to my house screaming. He chased after me down straight roads in his car, attempting to cut me off. I went into my backyard and into my back door and locked the door. I ran to the front door and locked that door as well. He began slamming himself into the front door and split the door wood and the frame, and I was screaming because at this point, my mother had left to go shopping for groceries in the town center. My siblings were all out with her, and my dogs and I were the only ones within the house. My dogs at this point were growling and barking like mad. I called the police and then called my mother as well. I took my dogs and hid within the large partial walk-in closet within my mother's room and grabbed my brother's machete and cried and was shaking uncontrollably, covered in bruises and covered in cuts. He then burst into the door by taking an axe from our outdoor shed and went into my room that was just up the stairs that led directly in front of the front door and began screaming for me. I heard him raiding my underwear drawers and sniffing my clothes and tearing my room apart, then going room to room to room. Once he heard the sirens, he then ran, and I heard the heavy feet slide and even fall a bit on the stairwell leading to the front door. He left, leaving the now broken door ajar, and sped off. After a while, when I was finally sure that he was gone, I checked my room and found he had taken my laptop, my student ID for high school, underwear, and photo albums of me. I listed the items to the police when they arrived, and also showed the rooms and the damaged door. We filed a report, and that's when I discovered his violent history. Weeks later, we began seeing drive-bys of his vehicle and even him with other individual cars we believed were his gang affiliates. I received Facebook requests from him in various account names, received many harassing phone calls to my cell phone from various numbers even after I would block one, because another would be issued, and more other things as well, including death threats and these actions to my siblings, requesting for me through Facebook messages saying that he was a friend or something like that. Then, one night in January, the sponsor of my meetings told me a female needed a ride. The ride was to a meeting and she needed it desperately because she was very depressed. I was able to drive and said that I could take her. I drove to where the girl was supposed to be picked up at. Then, a large white man entered the car and covered my face. I then woke up in the back of my own car to see two males in the front, one white and one black. Both men were about 6'4" and 240 pounds at least, since they are larger than my current boyfriend. I was duct taped in the back of my SUV in the middle of Newark, seeing the car getting onto the highway to go to Passaic. The men attacked me when I asked what they wanted from me. It was cold in the middle of January in the Northeast. I remember having my cell phone on me and texted my dad with my loose hand to find my car and ID my license plate and call my mom and dad, and hung up many times once the men left the car, with me just inside. I discovered that when they had left, they had sold all my belongings with my car, my GPS, my meds, my purse, and IDs, and other electronics that I had. They used this money received then to purchase copious amounts of crack and heroin. Since I had only about 7 months clean and wanted to survive, I said to the man that they must have some good stuff there, and that I could tell because I just got clean, and lied stating that jail forced me to get clean, which was not true. I had tried to find something to give me common ground to save me in this nightmare. While I tried to plan a way out of it, they laughed and nodded, and then blew the smoke from the crack pipe into my face, while the one man squeezed my cheeks so tightly they ached. Then, one man then started rubbing my legs and had torn my clothes apart. I screamed, "Please do not hurt me." Then they said, "It will not hurt," and the other man then grabbed my other arm and shot me up with a syringe loaded with heroin. And since I was clean, I passed out and woke up again later in the night to men out of the car. They were inside a drug house conversating with the gang members about getting more drugs, because these people obviously had a serious habit. They then pointed to me. I looked at my phone and realized I had been gone for 3 days by this point, and my mom had been texting me, "Where have you been?" and stuff like that. It was at that moment that I again called them and texted "track my license plate" and texted 911 help in big capital letters, but to no avail. It was at this moment the two men then barged in, and one must have seen the light due to the awkward positioning of me being taped and trying to use my only way to beg for help, and took my phone, greedily smiling, and then looked at the text and calls and smacked and kicked me over and over and over while cursing and yelling at me. He then handed the phone over and also sold it as well, my last possession besides my car that was almost on empty, the men stated. After a while, the men then drove to get drugs one more time. At this moment, I could see that the sun was breaking the sky at this point in the early morning at about 3 to 4 a.m. in the morning. They both once again got out of the car, and I, at that moment, pretended to sleep, since now I had a plan I hoped that would actually work this time. At this moment, they both entered the brick building. I wasted no time and found the switchblade I remembered I had, since I'd been carrying it since the stalking incident had occurred, and begun undoing the tapings as quickly as possible. After a long while passed, which seemed like forever, and then once it finished, I hopped into the front seat that had the driver's side door still open and closed the door, locking all the doors altogether. It was at this moment that the men began to slowly come out, and I turned the keys to the ignition and pressed hard on the gas and put the car into drive down the hill of the lightly lit street. I then focused on trying to remember where I was and how to get home as I cried, since now I was lost and within a dangerous area. At that point, I had no phone or GPS or map of any kind of where I was. I was panicking and scared, and the fact that they would come after me was also frightening to me, since I was out of gas then, and was now merely coasting down all the hills and straightaway streets of Patterson. I then saw a crossing guard and screamed which way was the town I needed to go to, and she gave me the directions. After a while of driving, I then reached the border of a town and Patterson, and my car died finally. In the snow I ran and had no clothes on. I was covered in bruises and I was covered in blood and crying. After a while, I reached a gas station at last with a phone. I fell to my knees, still crying, and begged for the man to lock the doors and please call the police, and also call my family because I had been kidnapped and missing for 4 days total. He was a younger kid and nodded and did exactly as I had asked and helped me up onto a chair. Not long after that, my family finally arrived just before the police, and when I saw them, I cried so hard. I hugged them as long as I could, and I never ever wanted to leave them again. I mean, I honestly thought that I would never see them or my siblings and dogs again, and I just kept on crying and crying. Afterwards, we spoke to the police, and I was taken to the hospital and a rape kit was done due to the events that had transpired. I am still afraid of men and being touched. I now have PTSD due to the horrifying details I had to leave out of this story to keep myself protected. Thank you. And also, to all out there, you're never safe. So be always prepared for the unexpected.